You started? Yeah. Okay, so we said Pirsum Rishon on Tanya. Somebody asked me if I'm going to be teaching Tanya Perek Nun Dalet. So no, not so exciting. One of the Koiftzim that was published this year, L'Kavod Gimel Tammuz, had in it a Hamachuna Pirsum Rishon, which was a copy of a page in Tanya that the Rebbe gave it doesn't say an exact date, it says in the Mems, the Rebbe gave this Tanya to Dr. Moshe Feldman to give to his son, Gedalia, something or other. I think he has a son who passed away. I'm not sure the background or the context of why the Rebbe gave him that Tanya. And it was an old Tanya, it was an old and rare printing of Tanya. It says it was printed in Vilna Tofresh Tzadik, which is not one of the, it seems that at some point it was not known that there was a Tanya printed there. Over there in the Kovetz, they have the whole history of this. So gestanden dort zwei Wörter that the Rebbe wrote on the margin of the Tanya in Igeras HaKodesh Siman Chaf Dalet. But before we get there, at men lernen a Shtickl Zohar zusammen. So the Zohar is in Parshas Truma, and I'll do my best to read and translate somewhat quickly. Zohar Parshas Truma, it's in Chelik Beis, Taf Kuf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, steht in Zohar Azoi. Ella Lamalka. Now, in our sprach, we would say Moshel Lamelech. In the Zohar, it seems to always skip the word Moshel. I'm not sure if it just skips the word Moshel and it just says Lamelech, and you're supposed to know that it means Moshel Lamelech, or somehow the word Ella in the Zohar means Moshel. I don't know, but I've seen that a number of times in Zohar that it just says Le Malko, Le something, and expects you to know that you're supposed to fill in the word Moshel over there. So Ella Lamalka, I'm going to translate as Moshe Lamelech, who sent the Shodar L'chol B'nei Masa. He sent a message to the people of a city, that he's going to come at a certain designated time and place to visit with the people of this city. So before the people of the city came to the place where the king was going to be, to the designated place, there was one individual who came there ahead of time. Benkach or Benkach, while that individual is there and the king is not yet there, also, and the people of the city are not yet there, also Malka, the king came. Ashkach lahu barnasha aktim tamon, and the king meets this one individual who was there earlier. Amalei, so the king says to him, Plan b'nei masa on inun, where are the people of the city? Amalei mori ano akdimnu minayu, I'm here ahead of everybody else. And they're all going to follow after me at the behest of the king. If this is the way it goes, it's going to be good in the eyes of the king. And the king stays there with him, and he talks with him. And this person becomes the friend of the king. And the rest of the town are going to come. The king is mispious with them. He gets on well with them, he's good to them, and he sends them off in peace. If the people of the town don't come, or they don't send somebody ahead of them to talk to the king, to represent them, and to say that they're all coming, so then the king is going to become angry. Okay, Adkan is the mashal. Now, what's the nimshal? Since if one person comes early and is found in the shul early, and the shchina comes and finds the person there early, and then he touches up the whole nimshal about how amazing it is if a person comes to shul early, and he brings the pasuk that it says, "Madua basi ve'ein ish ve'ein asar loiksiv ela ve'ein ish." The Eibusha doesn't need the whole minyan to be there early. If one person's there early, that person is the representative of all the people of the town to tell the Eibusha that the rest of the people are coming, and then this person is a tzaddik, and the Eibusha is mispious with all the people from the city, v'chulu v'chulu. And the emphasis here is on being there before davening, the aktim lebei kenishta. And then it says that you have to say, he says, v'hoikimna v'olishtakcha b'shirim v'tushbachan de David. So that's what we call Psukah de Zimra. You have to say Psukah de Zimra. Now it's important to realize, and till today it's like this by the Sfardim, by the Ashkenazim it's not like this, that Psukah de Zimra is not part of davening. Psukah de Zimra is before davening. And how do you start davening? You start davening by the Shliach Tzibur approaching the Talmud or whatever, and saying Baruch Hashem Amberach. He's inviting everybody to come and daven with him. Baruch Hashem Amberach, and then you start Birchas Krishma. That's the introduction to davening. Before davening, you're supposed to say Psukei Zimra. The way it is by the Ashkenazim by us today is that we say the Shtech Tzibur already says Psukei Zimra. So we, in our experience, Psukei Zimra is also part of davening. But here, the signon is very much that Psukei Zimra is before davening, and that's when this person is supposed to be there. At least one person should be there early to greet the king v'chulu. Now, then he says, Oman the mishtoi bebei knishna b'milin dechayil, somebody who talks in the shul divrei chayil, vaile, woe is to him. And then the Zohar enumerates a few different things. The achzei pruda, he's demonstrating disconnection. Vaile the goram menusa, he's taking away from the emunah. Vaile the lesle chulka balikad Yisrael, he has no chelak in alikei Yisrael. The achzei, the hales elika, he's demonstrating that that there is no God. V'lo yishtakach taman, or that Hashdei is not there. V'lo dochil v'les leichul kabei, he has no chelik in the Eibishter. V'lo dochil minei, and doesn't have yiras Hashem, he doesn't have fear of the Eibishter. Or v'anhink kelona b'tikuna ilah de le'elah, and he is demonstrating scorn at the tikuna ilah, at this whole thing of coming to shul and saying Psukei Zimra, etc. Okay. Ad kan steht in Zohar. And Ka'amor, this is in Zohar Parshas Truma. Now, there's a letter from the Alter Rebbe, and the letter that this person mission is written on is printed in Igeras HaKodesh Siman Chav Dalet. The letter is, as expected, also printed in Igros Kodesh of the Alter Rebbe, which was republished 10 or 12 years ago with the Ha'aros from Ber 11, etc. And over there, Ber 11 is Mishai that the letter comes be'erech from the year Tov Kuf Mem Hey. I don't think the science is exact, but he knows the Alter Rebbe signs the letter with his father Birchas HaChaim, so you know it's before Tov Kuf Mem Beis, and I think it says Liosh, but he says L'Sa'erech Tov Kuf Mem Hey. So I believe that Ba'ofen Klali this letter is familiar. Everybody, it's one of the, I think, the more famous letters in the Igeras HaKodesh, but we'll read through at least some parts of it. B'kitzer. Ahuvai achai al notareo reim ahuvim liyitzram usnuim liyitzram v'al yasa adam atzmei rosh shah achas lefnei hamokim, to disrespect the eis rotzin of davening. V'hamesapir b'tzrachav mare be'atzmei she'eni chafetz lehisboinen v'liris b'gilei gvei malchusay, somebody who's mesapir b'tzrachav, somebody who talks about his own affairs during davening, is showing that he is not interested in the closeness of the Eibishter that's available to us b'shas davening. And then he goes on, and he brings a mashal of a melech. Now, the way I read the mashal, it's very similar in concept. It's not similar necessarily in the words, but in the concept, it's very similar to the mashal we just read from the Zohar. It says like this: Derech hamelech liyos chevyo nuzay b'chadrei chadorim v'kama shoymim al apsochim asher ad kama v'kama mitzap ad asher kama v'kama mitzapim yomim v'shonim lirois uzay yechveidoi. Basically, it's very hard to access the king. It's very private. It's a whole, if you want to get there, you have to wait for years till you have an opportunity to see the king. When the king wants to be miskala to everyone, he sends a message out to everybody that he's coming. So then, so if the king basically sends out a message that he's coming to visit, and somebody stands there together with the tzibur of the king visiting, and instead of paying attention to the king, he is misasik in his own b'tzrachav. He talks about his own thing. Kama gerua v'sochel upesihu, how foolish such a person is. And then the Alter Rebbe goes on to say an interesting word, that there's two aspects to the affront that such a person is doing to the king. Number one, the some fact that you're not interested in the king. But number two, that you're not embarrassed to do this in front of other people. And soon we'll get to the previous Igeras HaKodesh Gimel. Over there, there's a similar vart. But here, there's two pratim. He says, so you don't care to look at the king more than you care about your own matters. Yeah, and then he brings the pasuk, made him koloin, that in front of other people You do the mashal, if I should say it on record, yeah, Gate and Mikveh, okay. So, fine. So that's the bizoyan that he gives. Also, Yuchaimish. He gives this mashal. So again, it's not mamish the same mashal as the Zohar, but it's a very similar idea. And then he says, and he's talking here about talking during davening in shul. And then he says like this: all of Amru b'Zohar HaKadosh, and such a person states in Zohar HaKadosh. And the Alter Rebbe says here three things. The anhing chelana b'tikkunei ilah. He's showing the scorn at the tikkunim that we're doing in davening in Pesukei Zimra. Ve'achzei pruda, and he's demonstrating disconnection. Ve'leslei chulka belikadi Yisrael Rachmana litzlan. Such a person has no chelik in the Eibishter. Then the Alter Rebbe finishes al kein shlichusayu derazal kavdina to make exera that nobody should talk. Okay. Now, if you look in the end of the Mashal of the Zohar, he said more than three things. He said, we said, achse vayle, achse pruda, garim mehem nusa. He says more things than the Alter Rebbe says here. But all of the three things the Alter Rebbe says here are found among the list that the Zohar says over there. But Mela, Ashkaf Rishon is pashut, that when the Alter Rebbe says over here, all of Amru b'Zohar HaKadosh, that he's referring to this Zohar in Parshas Truma. In the way the letter, I just want to be makdim, we're going to have to come back to this soon also, but it's clear that when the Alter Rebbe quotes Lashonos of the Zohar, certainly in letters, I don't know about in Tanya, certainly in letters when the Alter Rebbe quotes Lashonos of the Zohar, he's not makbid to quote it verbatim. And here you see Beferish doesn't quote it verbatim, for sure not in the right order, but sometimes he paraphrases the Zohar says in one language, and the Alter Rebbe will use different oisias. Bichlal, it's interesting to be ma'ayin. Nowadays, when a person writes something and you quote, as in Azan Zah Sefer Shteit Azoy and Azoy, the expectation is that you're going to quote it us ba'us. Once upon a time, it wasn't like that bichlal, and befrat with Zohar, that those who are mumchim in these inyonim say that even long after the Zohar was printed, it was still very much a live text. It was the manuscript culture of the Zohar was very much alive. So the people saw a lot less value in quoting the exact lashon of the Zohar, and you see that clear in these letters of the Alter Rebbe. We'll see more examples soon. So, under Verta, it's clear that the Alter Rebbe is referring to this Zohar, sign these words of Amru of Zohar, the three things that he says, and even the mashal he says it's not the same mashal of the Zohar, but you could see he's paraphrasing that Zohar to impress upon the Chassidim who are receiving this letter the importance of not talking in shul. And in the way the letter is printed in Igros Kodesh of the Alter Rebbe, Bar 11 is Takim Tzayin on the bottom. B'chlal, the way those letters work is that the tziyunim on the bottom, both Chav Gimel and Chav Daled have tziyunim from the Rebbe. I'm not sure where the Rebbe, some it's part of the Rishimis, but in Igros Kodesh of the Alter Rebbe, they have the tziyunim of the Rebbe on the bottom. But whenever there was something that the Rebbe wasn't mitzayin, but that Bar 11 found the makor for, Bar 11 put it in square brackets. So here, on this shtickle where the Alter Rebbe says, "All of Amru b'Zohar," Bar 11 is mitzayin in the bottom. Zohar Parshas Truma, this Zohar that we just said. Okay. In the Kovetz Haaretz that was printed last week for Gimel Tammuz by Ali Torah, not Rebbe Avram's Kovetz, the other one. So over there they have Hamachuna Pirsum Rishon, and they have a copy of this page of Tanya. In the Tanya was printed, said in the beginning, Vilna Tafri Shadik, the Rebbe gave it to Dr. Feldman to give to his son. And on the side of the page, I forgot to print it, but afterwards I can show it on the WhatsApp. On the side of the page, the Rebbe wrote two words. Re'ei, not Re'ei. Zoyar Chelik Gimel Daf Ayin Hayamid Beis B'Mikdash Melech. So the Rebbe seems to be saying that the Maramokim for all of Amru Zoyar is not Parshas Truma, which we just said, that's in Chelik Beis, but rather it's a different Zoyar in Chelik Gimel Daf Ayin Hay, and he's Mitzayin also Mikdash Melech. So, before we go to what it says in the Zohar in Chelik Gimel, what is Mikdash Melech? So Mikdash Melech is considered one of the fundamental Sfarim on the Zohar. The author is a Moroccan Mekubal, who I'm probably going to mispronounce his name, Reb Shalom Bozaglo, something like that. He later lived in Bozaglo, okay. And they call him the Rashab usually. He later lived in London. He is a Ben Doiroi, and I believe a Chaver of some sort of the Rachaim HaKadosh. He was also Zoicha both to be a recipient of a Haskama from Rabbi Yaakov Emden and also to be a recipient of accusations of Shabsos of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, so he got both sides of that stick. In his Sefer, he is mitzayin a lot of things. It's a Sefer on the Zohar, so he's mitzayin a lot of things of the Arizal that are negated to the Zohar. And it's quoted in Tanya and other places, and by the Nesiach Chabad, it was accepted as an authoritative sefer on the Zohar. I reminded when I was preparing this, she told me, maybe you remember, in the Detroit Mesivta, Toshin Samech Gimel, so they had one of the local Rabbonim or Rosh Yeshiva, I don't remember who it was, come to Feheras. So it was Masechtas Psachim. So the guy asked, Vu steht, so he asked a certain question and nobody in the room knew, so it was very embarrassing. And anyway, it turns out that it was a Tosfos. And it was on one of the program that we learned Lagir, so we didn't learn the Tosfos. We were 14, 15-year-old Bachrim. So it has a Zagaton that, steht im Psachim Daf Kuf. He has to think if it's in Rashi, if it's in Tosfos, in the Gemara, in the Rashbam, whatever. So upon him, it could be that in the early Chassidim learned Zohar v'chulu. It could be that when you mitzvah into Zohar, we're including in that you're mistama familiar with what the Mishnah, what the Mikdash Melech on this Zohar says. So the Rebbe is being mitzvah here. Zohar Chel Gimel Daf Ayin Hey. But Mikdash Melech in andere Werte, lav dafka when the Alter Rebbe says v'ol of Amar b'Zohar Kodesh means dafka what it says in the Zohar. Could also mean that he's meaning the way it's nisbar in the Mikdash Melech. Okay, so after all this Akdama, let's go to the Zohar in Chel Gimel that the Rebbe is mitzayin over here. So it's in Parshas Achrimois, and the context is in the Parsha of Aroyos, so it's talking about Kedusha, and the importance of a person being Nizar in all the Ramachi Varim. That whole genre of discussion. And then the Zohar says as well, Tana al Gimel milin misakvin v'Yisrael b'galusa. For three things the Geula is delayed. Al da'avdin kulana b'shchinta b'galusa, that the Yidden are showing scorn at the Shechina in Galus. And the second thing is the Mahadre Apayu Meshchinta, they turn their face away from the Shechina. And thirdly, al the Mesavi Gamayu Kam Meshchinta, that they metame themselves in front of the Shechina. V'kulhu oikimna b'masnita dilon. Now I didn't see anyone explaining those last four words, but I think what v'kulhu oikimna b'masnita dilon means that all of these three things are elaborated on elsewhere in the Zohar. So here I'm just giving you the capital, and all of those three things elsewhere in the Zohar is mavur what they are exactly. Okay, so the Mishnah, the Mikdash Melech, he goes through all these three things, and he says, as he quotes in Chemdas Yomim, bring the Foneshis Chachma. So those who are keeping score of the Chemdas Yomim discussion in Chabad and what the Rabbeim's attitude to Chemdas Yomim. So here you have another quote that the Rebbe's mitzayin to the Chemdas Yomim via Mikdash Melech, Ein Kamukaymai. But the Chemdas Yomim is quoting Reishis Chachma. So I'm quoting now from the Reishis Chachma because the Chemdas Yomim just says v'chulu about this part, but he explains that the last thing, the Mesavi Garmayu, is talking about all sorts of inyanim that a person has to be nizar, that he's not nizar, in aroyas, in kashrus, and v'chulu, and that's why the Zohar brings it here, because the Zohar is talking here about Kedusha being Agiten in Al Ramachi Ivrim, in Parshas Achrimois, Kedusha. So that's the Shaykh. Why is the Zohar saying here that Tana al Gimel Dvarim Misakvin Yisrael B'Galusa? Because the third of those three things is Negeya to the discussion of the Zohar over there. Fine, so let's leave that aside. That's Pshat from the Zohar over there. It's not Mamish Negeya to us. What is the first and the second thing? So the first thing, says the Mikdash Melech, quoting the Chemdas Yomim, quoting Reishis Chachma, just for context, the Mikdash Melech is Mamish Bekitzer. In Chemdas Yomim it's even more barichas, and in Reishis Chachma it's even more barichas than there. But I'm going to read the stickle as it is in the Mikdash Melech that the Rebbe is mitzayin. So he says, the first thing, the Avdin Klana B'Shchinta B'Galusa, that's Lashon Desire, Zok the Mikdash Melech. What does this mean? Heim HaMedabrim Sichas Chulim B'Beis HaKnesses. This means people who talk in Shul. V'raya, how do I know that when the Zohar says in Achrimois that it means that the Avdin Klana is Marich the Galus? It's referring to talking in Shul. V'raya, Mashakos B'Zohar, Pashas Truma. That same Zohar that we started off with in Pashas Truma, where it says that Man the Mishloi B'Beikin Ishta Ani Klana B'Tikunei Elah, it's the same word, Ani Klana. That's B'Tikunei Elah, it's B'Shchinta B'Galusa, but Ani Klana. Dort steht Ani Klana, dort steht Ani Klana. Ani Klana, the Taish Meret Dvarim B'Telim in Shul. And this is the inyan of this is what the Zohar means over here, that's Ma'ak of the Galus. Then, the second thing, what's the second thing? That you turn a Mahadri Apayu Mishchinta, you turn your face away from the Shechina. So there, I'm going to actually read it. Okay, I'm going to read this, it's a state also in Mikdash Melech, but I want to read it from the Reishis Chachma because there it's a little bit more spelled out. He says, that the Mahadri Apayim Shchinta has Oifen Klali and Oifen Prati. Oifen Klali, it means people who say Rishoyim Shechayzim B'Hoichim Pneim Nashchina V'Oimrim B'Fiam She'enam Reitzim Liyislam Chelik B'Lekei Yisrael. Hopefully these words ring some sort of bell to the Zohar. Nandervet in Pashtas in, and it means people who are completely dismissing Yiddishkeit, let's say. Aber B'Oifen Prati, it's shaykh to everyone. And he says it means two things. First of all, HaPoisek Divrei Torah al Dvarim B'Teilim. Somebody who in the middle of learning stops learning to talk Dvarim B'Teilim. And also, Kayoytze B'Zeh HaMispalel of the Emtza Poisek Afiluhu B'Zmiros. So here you see again that he's considering Afiluhu B'Zmiros. And under that, Zmiros is not mamish yet davening, it's still kilo before davening. But even if you're Poisek in Zmiros, in the middle of Sukkot Zimra, that's also, and your mistakil, Lehistakil kan v'kan b'tzarchei atzmoi, to care or to talk about or to think about your own needs, that's Bichlal what the Zohar is saying, that Mahadri Apayim Mishchinta is Ma'akiv Yisrael B'Galusa. Okay, so now, what's going on over here? The Zohar, the Alter Rebbe in Geras Kodesh Chav Daled, is clear that it's talking to the Zohar in Parshas Truma. But the Rebbe is mitzayin here to the Zohar in Parshas Achames and the Mikdash Melech. So the first thing you have from the Mikdash Melech is that right away he ties it back to the Zohar in Parshas Truma. So the Rebbe just, I assume the Rebbe was writing for himself, whatever, I don't know, but I'm saying right away, you have in there the Zohar Parshas Truma too, so that's clear that we're there also. But why is the Rebbe Mitzayin here to Chele Gimel and to the Mikdash Malach? So the Chayra, it adds, we're adding over here two things. Number one, the Chomer HaInyan, that's Mamish Ma'akvin Yisrael B'Galusa, so it's Mamish HaInyan Chamor, which you should take seriously. And also, Hagam that the Alter Rebbe over there is talking Sichas Chulim Beis Knesses. The Lashon in the Zohar in Chelik Bein Parshas Truma is Hasach. What's the Lashon? Sichas Chulim, yeah. Man de Mishtoi b'Milin dechoil. Sichas Chulim, yeah. But the Alter Rebbe's Lashon over there is different. The Alter Rebbe's Lashon is Hamesapir b'Tzrochav Ma'ar be'atzmo she'ein chafetz. So if you go through the Mikdash Melech, the word of that Mahadri Apayim Mishchinta is Machzir Ponov lehistakel b'Tzorchei atzmoi. That's kind of matches up neither with the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe, the specific Lashon of Mitzapa B'Tzrachav. So, B'derech Efshe can zayin, that's why the Rebbe was mitzayin to the Mikdash Melech and to the Zohar Chelik Gimel, because that adds more flavor to the whole, to the Zushtal between what the Alter Rebbe is saying and what he's quoting from the Zohar. And the Lashon in the Alter Rebbe, Ma'are be'atzmei she'ein chafetz lehisboinen v'liris b'gilu k'vei malchusay, is certainly very reminiscent of the Lashon in the Reishis Chachma, which the Mikdash Melech is quoting. Harishayim she'em chayzim v'hoifchim pneim in ashchina v'oimrim b'fiyam she'enam reitzim liyos. There's a Zushal over there. So Be'etzem can be sagen ad kan, but I still have 20 minutes, and also I have something else to say. B'hakdama luli de mistafina with all the appropriate disclaimers. There's another letter. Until now we've been talking about Igeres HaKodesh Shmuchav Dalet. There's another letter which is printed one simon earlier in Igeres HaKodesh Shmuchav Gimel, and it's a very similar theme. It's about, we'll see soon the Lashon inside, but it's about before and after davening, people talking in Shul and becoming a Moshe Leitzim. And Mestam Doilam, at least on some level, the letter should ring a bell from Chitas, that Sashrekel Chazach and is Doichik Ragle Ashchina, and Alter Rebbe wants very much that the atmosphere in Shul, even before and after davening, should remain an atmosphere of Kedusha. And in that context, Alter Rebbe says that learning Torah ba'asara, that everybody, even if it's not interesting for you, to make sure between Mincha and Ma'ariv, Melant Ein Yaakov or the Melant Halachas, everybody should stay in. Mr. Adolam remembers this. This letter is also printed in Igros Kodesh of the Alter Rebbe, and over there, Ber Levin also says it's Le'erech Tovkuf Memhei. So now they're printed next to each other in Igeres HaKodesh. They're Be'erech from the same time, and they're not identical, but they're certainly adjacent themes. So let's read a few lines of this letter of Igeres HaKodesh Shmuchav Gimel. B'gzeiras irim piskamin. Oh, by the way, before I read the letter, there's two things that the Rebbe often said that I don't think is common to hear, certainly not outside Lubavitch, and even within Lubavitch, I don't think it's something that the Friedrich Rebbe or whatever gekocht has. Number one is the the Gewaldigkeit of the Beis HaKnesses. Yeah, how many Farbrengens did the Rebbe start? As he didn't come into Chazam in a place that we just have in Mincha with a minute, that's the word that this is a shul and Sahiligan art and it has to be treated and respected and revered as such is something that the Rebbe started many Farbrengens with. And also, the Indian of learning Limud HaTorah Ba'asara Dafka is something that the Rebbe mentioned a number of times. And again, obviously, the more people learn Torah, but the specific Adgasha as Limud HaTorah Ba'asara is something that the Rebbe mentioned a number of times, which I don't think is common, certainly outside of Chabad, to be a specific thing of other people daven with them. We learn Torah with them. Okay. Fine. So let's read some of the letter. Shteit Hazoi. Al Kain, after the Hakdama, Shait Al Rebbe Hazoi. Ra be'inai hamasa shenasa tachas hashemesh bichlal ubefrat ben achai v'reya hanegoshim al Hashem agoshu zu tefila. And if you toys, Ein lecha el boina, listen to the voices here. Ein lecha el boina ukelona deshchinta godel mizer rachman litzlan. So first of all, it's very sharp voices, but also it's very much similar lashon to the lashonis of the Zohar that we've been reading over here. And then again, he makes this hadgasha that kilo and agivis is in. It's worse if you're doing it in front of other people than if you do it b'yachid, because you do it b'yachid bistu akal, but if you do it in front of other people, the pshat that you don't even care to make a show as if you care about the kedusha of davening and shul v'chulu v'chulu. And then he says, "Avol vai the leman the dochkin l'shchinta." He brings, okay, I should go back in line. Yeah, he says, "Be'etzem, when you do this, you're pushing away the shchina." No, you can't push away the shchina because malach asa b'rahatim. Shchinta b'galusa, the Eibishter Kilu can't get away from you. Aber said, "Kumanatog, where you're going to regret this." Vai leman the dochkin l'shchinta kad yokim la kutshabricha v'yemelo isnari meyafar. When kum the gula and the Eibishter tells the shchina kumi meyafar, so then you're going to be very embarrassed that you were pushing away the shchina in the time of Golus. Now, before I continue the letter, here's a perfect example of a lashon in the Alter Rebbe that's kilu l'chayre, a phantom Zohar. I mean, it's Zohar-esque language, but it doesn't. Sishtaz Zohar. In other words, these words kad yokim la kutshabrichu v'yemelo isnari me'ofar is a paraphrase from the Zohar in Parshas Chayesara. But the first half of that sentence, v'aylaman the dochkin l'shchinta, I mean, I searched high and low. Sishtaz Zohar, as far as I could tell, and anybody who's Bar 11, nobody was mitzayin any Zohar. This seems to be the Alter Rebbe's that he's expressing himself in a Zohar type of language. So it's just further Moshiach that when the Alter Rebbe is quoting the Zohar, when he's talking here, not every word is exact. B'chlal Shadua, that in Tanya there's a difference in the degree of diuk between the letters and the other things. Okay, anyway. Then the Alter Rebbe continues. Okay, now this should hopefully be familiar for everyone. This is straight out of Zohar Chele Gimel, that Parshas Achimos. But now the rest of the line is different. He says, "Val tlas milen misakven Yisrael begalusa, al the dochkin l'shchinta, das steht nicht in Zohar, val da avdin kulana b'shchinta, v'chulu." So the third thing the Alter Rebbe doesn't say, he just says v'chulu. What by us in the Zohar is the first thing, that the Alter Rebbe says the second thing, the avdin kulana b'shchinta. What by us in the Zohar is the second thing, it doesn't say, is certainly not in the same Oisius, but I'm suggesting maybe the Alter Rebbe is saying it in different Oisius and switching around the order. He says the dochkin l'shchinta. By us it says the mahadri apayu mishchinta. Here it says the dochkin l'shchinta. Maybe there's a connection. Now, in Igros Kodesh of the Alter Rebbe, with Bar 11 printing the Horus from the Rebbe on that. So on this shtickle Tanya, the Mitzayin, that the Rebbe was Mitzayin, Zohar Chele Gimel Daf Ayin Hayam Beis. That's mamish our Zohar. Now the Reverta, the Rebbe is saying, the Rebbe's lashon exactly is lahoir. Lahoir mizoyer chele gimel daf ein hem and beis. And now the Reverta, da steht in zoyer chele gimel daf ein hem and beis, but it's not exact. Avol, this is the Rebbe's oisius, lo yichoshiv sham the dochkin chulu. Now the Rebbe is being mitzayin right away. Is lahoir, this is the zoyer chele gimel, but the lashon is not exact. So now, b'derech efshar al kaponim, I want to say like this. That the Rebbe is mitzayin the Zohar Chele Gimel on the Igeres HaKodesh Mechuf Gimel, and right away the Rebbe is meir that the lashon is not punkt exact. Now we see that in Igeres HaKodesh Chav Daled, mamish one page later, almost the same words in Tanya, the Rebbe is mitzayin Zohar Chele Gimel I Mikdash Melech. So maybe the Rebbe really intended to say it one page earlier. It's mamish the same in the one page earlier, almost identical lashon. It's a very easy switch to happen. maybe the Rebbe meant to be Mitzayin Zohar Chelik Gimel, not in Igeres HaKodesh Chav Dalet, but in Igeres HaKodesh Chav Gimel. Like Yitaka, we know Beferish was Mitzayin Igeres HaKodesh Chav Gimel over there. And Oy Bazoi, so now, if that's the case, what does the Tzion to Mikdash Malach help us? So there are two things. First of all, the Alter Rebbe is talking here about the Moshe of Leitzim in Shul. If we come to Arayin Zohar Chelik Gimel, like what's the connection? Klas Milin. That's talking about Aroyas and Inyanim of Kedusha. So the Rebbe is telling you, no, Pasha Pshat, if you look at Mikdash Melech, you'll see that Taka, the third of the three things, is talking about Kedusha, and that's Taka, the thing that Alter Rebbe doesn't quote, he says this is V'chulu, because that's Taka not Negei over here. But the first two things, if you look at Mikdash Melech, they're both talking about the disrespecting Shul and disrespecting davening and Dvarim B'Teilim V'chulu V'chulu. So if you just learn the Zohar without the Mikdash Melech, maybe you don't see how there's a shaykhis to what the Alter Rebbe is talking about over here. But if you learn the Mikdash Melech, it's clear that the first two of the three things, which are the ones that the Alter Rebbe is meaning to quote over here, is mamish the same inyan, and that's how it fits into Igeres HaKodesh Chav Gimel. Number two, mamish b'derech efsher, that maybe here the Rebbe is answering the question. The Rebbe said that it doesn't say over there the Dochkin, but it could be that if you touch up what's the state in Mikdash Melech, quoting from the Reishis Chochmah, that Itaka doesn't say the oisius of the Dochkin, but the way he describes what Mahadrei Apayu means, it's mamish the same inyan as the Dochkin. And here we've already established that the Alter Rebbe is not being makbid here to quote the Lashonis exact of the Zohar. It could be that that's how the Rebbe is answering this question. I'll read the Lashon again. Yeah, Mahadrei Apayu min Shchinta. So first of all, it means the Rishoyim shechayzim hoivchim pneihem, and they say b'fiam she'ein roitzim liyos laim chelik b'lekei Yisrael v'chulu v'chulu. And then and also such a person I'm saying this very I'm not 100% convinced, but it's very possible that this is a zikah to that question, that Hagam, you're not going to change Zoysis in the Zohar. The Dochkin the Shchinta steht nicht in Zohar. But what does the Dochkin the Shchinta mean? That you're pushing away the Shchinta, but nicht interessiert in the Shchinta. But if you see the way that what steht here in Zohar steht, the Mahadrei Apayu, you're turning away your face from the Eibishter. And Ogetaicht in the Mikdash Melech, in the Reishis Chochmah, that's talking about davening, and that's Kilo, you're telling the Eibishter, I'm not interested. That's Mamish the Inyan, which the Alter Rebbe says over here. How does he touch up? What does it mean, Dochkin the Shchinta? So touched up Friya, that he says that he's not embarrassed in front of other people, he's not even making a show to pretend as if he's interested in the Eibishter. So l'chayra, it's mamish the same inyan, and I don't think it's mufrich to say that this tzion that they were just mefarasim now, the Pirusim Rishon as a tzion on Igeres Chav Dalet, may have been intended to be a tzion on Igeres Chav Gimel, and